Alright, today I'm going to be teaching you how to apply team colors to a unit inside of Universe at War. There are several applications and prerequisites that you'll need in order to do this, so if you already have all of these apps, just skip to the timestamp below. I will be leaving the links to all of this software in the description. First, you're going to want to install Blender version 3.6.9, preferably the zip version. Along with that, you'll want to download the Alamo Engine plugin. You will also need Paint.net to edit the textures, and these two plugins for it. In addition, you'll want to download the Universe at War launcher, which contains many tools that you can use to edit the game. If you'd prefer not to download the launcher, or you're looking for a specific tool to use, you can find all of these tools in the Modding Tools channel of our Universe at War Discord. To get Blender to work with the Alamo plugin, you will want to extract Blender somewhere onto your system. Then extract the Alamo plugin. After this, go inside the folder for your Alamo plugin and cut the IO Tools folder. Then you will go into Blender 3.6.9, navigate to 3.6, go to Scripts, go to Add-ons, and paste the folder in there. Now you can open up Blender. To get the Alamo plugin working, you will want to go to Edit, Preferences, and then go to Add-ons. Inside of Add-ons, you will type in Alamo. Once you find the Alamo Tools plugin, make sure that this checkmark is checked. If everything is done correctly, you should be able to see the ability to import and export ALO and ALA files. Next, you will want to install Paint.net, so let's extract the software and its plugins. Click on the exe and install the application. Next, you want to add all of these .dll plugins into the software. So cut all of the DLLs, then navigate to Program Files, Paint.net, Effects, and paste them into here. Now that you have downloaded the editing tools along with their plugins, let's start editing the game files. Inside of your launcher, you will find the game located inside of Game, Universe at War Earth Assault. The files we need are inside of Data. Everything that we need from the game is stored inside of these .meg files, so we're going to extract them. Inside of Universe at War Earth Assault, navigate to Third-Party Tools, and you should see something called megeditor.exe. Click on it. Go ahead and choose Open, navigate to the directory of your game, and click on the first meg file. To extract the files, click on the topmost item, scroll to the bottom, and then hold Shift and click on the bottom item. Then go to Edit and Extract Files. I recommend making a new folder and naming that folder whatever the meg file is named. Click on the folder you created and press OK. As you can tell, if we navigate to that directory, all of those files have been properly extracted. Do this for every single meg item down here. If you want to skip some of this, primarily what we need is inside of config.meg, models.meg, patch.meg, and textures.meg. But it's always a good practice to have a full extraction of the game in case there are any files that it's looking for that aren't available. You may run into issues extracting your files if the file size of some of the items selected are 0 kilobytes. When you have all of your items selected, simply hold Control and left-click on the items that don't have any file size. This will make it to where they won't extract and therefore won't cause any errors. When you are done cutting and pasting the items in the game, you should get something that looks like this. We are going to go into each one of these folders and combine the data folders together. However, we are going to combine the patch section last. To do this, create a new folder, and then we're going to cut and paste each item inside of it. Remember to cut the patch meg last. When you cut and paste the patch data, it will overwrite whatever is currently inside of the folders. Click Replace Files in Destination. Now you can remove all of your empty folders. Now that you've extracted the files from your game and put them in a format that's easy to sort through, let's make a copy of them. This is so if we manage to muddy up the game files by editing too many of them, or causing errors, corrupting stuff, doing whatever else, we don't have to re-extract the game again because we already have this backup. Navigate back to your launcher, go inside of the game, click on Third-Party Tools, and then copy the Allo Viewer and paste it into the data folder of your extracted copy of the game. The Allo Viewer allows you to get a preview of what your in-game models will look like before you actually go into the game. Now that you have everything set up and your software is downloaded, we can start editing the textures. But before we do this, let me give you a brief summary as to how the color mapping works for objects inside of Universe at War. On the left, we have Paint.net open, and on the right, we have the Alamo Viewer. As you may be able to tell, this looks like a blank empty canvas. However, it is not. If you navigate to Effects, click on the Multi-Threshold plugin, and then adjust the opacity, you'll notice that there's actually a hidden texture underneath the transparency. This transparency is known as the alpha layer. The parts of the texture that are invisible do not have color applied to them. The parts that are visible do get color applied to them. The original texture for this helicopter is completely blank, which means if we try to change the color, it won't do anything. If the texture was completely visible like this, then it would paint the entire object a different color. If the texture is half visible and half transparent, then this will affect how much fade the color has on the model. Preferably, when you're adding colors to a unit, you will end up with a texture like this. The parts that are visible are the parts that get color, and the parts that are invisible are the parts that don't receive color. You may also notice how some of the items are partially visible. This allows the color to appear more faded and less predominant, which works great for smaller details like decals and logos and smaller little bits of greebling. For example, if this greebling had no transparency, it might appear blotchy and out of place. That's why some parts of the texture can appear faded while others are fully visible. Now, although you can go into Paint.net and manually erase all of the sections that you don't want to be visible, this would be a very tedious thing to do with a lot of trial and error. What you want to do instead is create a masking layer using Blender. This masking layer will easily allow you to select all of the parts that you want to have color, so you can make the rest of the items in the model transparent. But how do you create this masking layer, you may ask? Well then, let's get started by painting a model. For this example, we're going to apply team colors to the APC unit. To get started, let's open up Blender. Remove everything in your scene. Then go to File, Import, and then go to .alo importer. Then navigate to the directory of your extracted game. The models will be located inside of Data, Art, Models. You can use the search bar to type in what you're looking for. In this instance, we know that the model is called MV Defender. Click Import ALO file. As you can see, the model is now imported into Blender and you can edit it however you like. Naturally, you would want to go to the Texture Paint tab and paint the texture manually. However, you may notice that if you try to paint the vehicle, it gets all screwed up like this. So how do we fix this issue? We can fix the issue by changing the texture that is present. As you can tell, if you navigate to the Texture Paint tab and you go over to Tool and look at the texture slots, you'll find the textures used for the model. Search for these texture names by going into the extracted version of your game. Go to Data, Art, Textures, and use the Search tab to search for the texture names. These are the textures that we want. We will mainly be editing this MV Defender texture right here. So let's copy all of these and paste them into a new directory for clarity's sake. We'll create two new folders called Old and New. Paste the textures into the Old folder. Next, we will open the mvdefender.dds with paint.net. Go to Effects, go to Multi-Threshold, and set the opacity to 255. Now go to File, Save As, back out of the Old folder, and save it as a PNG. Click Save, and then OK. Next, go back to Blender and go to the Layout tab. Click on Material, and select your model. Then click on the item in Base Color, scroll up, and click on Image Texture. You will click Open, and then navigate to the new PNG that you just created. With all that said and done, you should be able to go back to the Texture Paint tab and paint on the model. Now we can begin to create a mask. To do this, I like to choose a color that stands out from the rest of the texture, so in this case, we'll choose a bright pink. For this model, we shall create multiple masking layers. This is to experiment and see which parts of the model you think look good with color and which parts you don't. We shall create masking layers for these strips, parts of the armor, and the decals. Let's start with these pieces of armor on the side. It may be tempting to manually paint over this with your brush and to be as careful as possible, but there's an easier way to do this. Press Ctrl Z to undo any mistakes that you've made, and go into Layout. Make sure the object you want to tamper with is selected and go into Edit mode. Click away from the model to deselect it. Click the Face Select panel up here. Now if you hold Shift and select the faces, you can select the specific areas of the model that you want to have color applied to. Once you're done, go back into Texture Paint mode. Then press the Paint Mask button. As you can see, you can now paint on these parts of the model without affecting anything else. Let's expand this view. Here are some general tips. You may find it annoying that you want to paint all of this thing, but it's only painting one face at a time without the other. If you want to paint through solid objects, you can go to Options and deselect these two checkboxes. Now, you may run into situations where you're painting your model and then all of a sudden paint is showing up in areas where you don't expect it to. One possible reason could be that you have your bleed setting turned up. Bleed makes it to where the pixels that you paint will extend a little ways past the borders that you initially set. You can adjust the bleed by going to Options and adjusting this slider. Now, as you can tell, if you paint with bleed set to 0, it's no longer painting in the unexpected area. However, you do end up with these situations where sometimes it doesn't completely paint the corners in. That's completely fine. Just turn off your mask and paint over it. By default, the bleed will be set to 2, which will normally be fine. However, I am simply giving the warning that if your bleed is set too high and you use the Fill Brush command, you may end up with a situation where it paints areas of the model that you don't want to be painted. So by simply turning down the bleed, you can avoid this entirely. In other cases, you may notice that other parts of the model are getting painted when you simply don't want them to. As you can tell, I painted over here, but it also painted over here and in this corner. The reason for this is that parts of the texture are duplicated and reused all throughout the vehicle. If you go to the UV Editing tab and press A to select all of the vehicle, you'll notice that there are a lot of overlapping pieces on the mesh. By changing the UV selection mode to Island and pressing on Move, you can notice that there are almost duplicate-like sections in the model. Again, this is because multiple parts of the model are using the exact same texture. In order to fix this, you would need to completely rebake this texture and edit the ALO file directly. We will not be doing that in this video, but it is something to keep in mind when painting your model. Now, back to painting the APC. We can paint these blocks by selecting their topology and then pressing the Fill option. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, we have painted these two bars on the vehicle, however you may notice that a tiny little strip got painted outside of the designated area. We're not concerned about the physical appearance of the texture as we are only concerned about the pink parts. So if there are ever any areas of pink that you do not like, possibly because it bleeded over onto other parts of the texture, simply holding Control and left-clicking on the mouse allows you to erase that pink. You can see the change happening up here. As I have stated before, this can often be a result of the bleed being turned up too high. But sometimes there's just no getting around having a low-resolution texture on the model. Now let's use the same techniques to add this circle bit to the pink masking layer. Now, we have painted this round piece in the front, however, as you can tell in the back, there is a part that we might not want to be pink. It's within some cracks and crevices, so we're trying to paint over it, but we just can't reach it. Another way to reach into parts that are difficult to paint over is you can go to Edit Mode, select the faces that you want to disappear, and press H to hide them. To make them reappear, just press Alt and H. However, even with parts of the model disappeared, it still doesn't want to be painted over. This is where we can employ another technique. Go over to the window on the left side and go into the Paint tab. Now hold Control and paint over different parts of the model until you see this disappear. As you can tell, we have discovered that the black is coming from this corner. As you can tell, we were able to manually paint over this section of pixels to make the pink disappear from this outline. In some instances, you may want the pink expanded upon. This is where we can draw over the texture manually. Once again, we have an area that may be difficult to paint, so we can paint it over here instead. Next, let's add some pink to this ring around the gun. Once again, we got some pink in an area where we don't want it to be, so let's just paint over it. Now that we've created our first layer, let's go ahead and save it. You can do this by going over to the tab on your left and selecting Image. Then press Save As and name it whatever you want. In this instance, let's call it Pink 1. Now let's paint over the strips in a second layer. We'll go to the Materials tab, click on the material, and open up the original MC Defender PNG. This will reset the color. Now you may be asking, how do you paint something like these strips? They don't align with any of the topology on the model. This is where sometimes it's a good idea to paint the texture manually. We can clearly make out where the strips are located. So let's go to the Fill option, expand this, click Advanced, and lower the fill threshold. Now we can start selecting these parts of the strip. It won't be perfect, but this will help give you a good start. Now let's start using our paintbrush and our erase tool to fill in everything else. Now that we've finished painting the second layer, let's go ahead and save it as Pink 2. Now we'll go ahead and apply the same technique to the decals. Now let's say we also want to paint the wheels. However, the wheels are part of a different object. You can select the wheels by going to the Layout mode, clicking on the wheels, and then going back into Texture Paint. However, you may notice that these wheels use a different texture. Therefore, we also need to create an alternate PNG for the mvDefenderTire.dds file. You can do this by opening mvDefenderTire with Paint.net, going to Effects, go to the Multi-Threshold plugin, turn up the opacity to 255, press OK, press File, Save As, then Save as PNG, and place it outside of the old folder. Click OK. Now you can pull up the new texture. So go to the folder icon and click on mvDefenderTire.png. Now you should be able to edit the tires. As you can tell, the topology of the tires do not match up with the textures, so we're going to manually paint over the wheels the same way we did before. Once you've painted the tires, let's go ahead and save the image and call it Pink 4. Once we've created all of our masking layers, we can now start editing the original textures. Go to the old folder and open up mvDefenderTire.dds. Go to Effects and set the multi-threshold to 255. Now drag and drop Pink 4. Add Layer. Press the Layers button. Select the Magic Wand option, hold Shift, and click on one of the pink parts of the texture. Deselect the Pink 4 texture and select the background texture. Go to Adjustments and select Hue/Saturation. Set the saturation to 0. Turn the lightness up to about 10 and press OK. Now press Edit and then press Invert Selection. Go to Adjustments and then press Invert Alpha. Now the texture should be ready to save. However, we do want to make sure that the color of the wheels matches the colors of other units in the game. We can do this by going to your extracted copy of the game, go to Data, Art, and then Textures. Then you can take any random texture and put it in here. Let's look for the grunt. Drag and drop the grunt texture into Paint.net. Add Layer. You will want the wheels to look similar to this texture in terms of the coloring, which therefore means you should probably turn up the contrast and adjust the brightness. Press Ctrl Z to get rid of this. Reselect your background, press Edit, and then invert your selection again. Now the wheels should be the only thing highlighted. Go to Adjustments, and then go to Brightness and Contrast. Now, adjust the brightness and contrast sliders until the wheels look similar to the other textures in the game. Now you can go ahead and save the texture. Go to File, Save As, and then put it inside of your new folder. Make sure to save the item as a .dds file. Also make sure that it contains its original name. When you save the file, make sure to save it as a linear DXT5 file. Press OK. Then press Flatten. Now let's edit the main body of the vehicle with the other masking layers. So go to Old and open mvdefender.dds with paint.net. Go to Effects and set the multi-threshold to 255. Now drag and drop Pink 1, Pink 2, and Pink 3. We will be making the strips and the logos partially transparent, and the main bulk of the vehicle will be fully visible. To do this, let's make sure that Pink Layer 2 and Pink Layer 3 do not intersect with Pink Layer 1. So select the magic wand, go to the Pink 3 layer, and then hold Control, Shift, and then left click. Now make it disappear and go to Pink Layer 2, and then we're going to once again Control, Shift, left click. Now that both layers Pink 3 and Pink 2 are selected, let's navigate to Pink Layer 1, and we are going to press Delete. This makes it so that the transparent layers don't intersect with the visible layers. Next, suppose you wanted to keep this yellow line. We covered up the yellow line with Pink Layer 1, so how do we get it back? You can do this by making all of the other layers invisible. The yellow line is right here. Go to the Rectangle Select option, hold Control and hold left click and drag your mouse all the way down until you have the entire yellow line selected. Then navigate back to Pink Layer 1 and delete the pink. Now the yellow line is no longer part of the color mask. So now let's go ahead and select Pink Layer 3 and Pink Layer 2 since they are on the transparency layer. We can do this by clicking on the magic wand and pressing Control Shift left click, going to Pink Layer 2, then Control Shift left click. Now make sure the background is highlighted and you remove the other layers. Then go to Adjustments, then go to Hue and Saturation, set the saturation as 0, set the lightness to around 10, and press OK. Then go to Effects, go to Multi-Threshold, and set the opacity to around 100. Click OK. Next, let's select Pink Layer 1 only, go back to the background, and now we're going to go to Adjustments, select the Hue and Saturation, set it to 0 and 10 respectively, and now we'll go to Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast, and then adjust this until it looks pretty close to the other units in the game. Then click OK. Now that we have adjusted our layers, let's select everything. So we'll select Pink 3 by doing Control Shift left click. We'll go to Pink 2, Control Shift left click. Then we'll go to Pink 1, Control Shift left click. Now that all the layers are highlighted, make sure to select the background and deselect all of the others. Go to Edit, go to Invert Selection, go to Adjustments, and then click Invert Alpha. Now save your texture. Save it as a .dds file. Place it inside of your new folder. And make sure that it is a DXT5 file. Click OK. Click Flatten. Now, let's see if these textures work. You can do this by copying them and pasting them into your extracted copy of the game. Go to Art, Textures, and put them in here. Then open your Allo Viewer. Go to File, Open, navigate to the folder of your extracted game, go to Data, Art, Models, and then search for it in there. As you can see, you can select the colors in the top left corner, and you are able to see that the changes that you made have taken effect. To apply these textures to a mod, simply copy and paste them into the textures folder of that mod. Let's see if it works in the game. As you can see, the Defender APC now has its new colors applied to it. Now, before I end the video, let me provide you with a couple of quick tips. If you head over to Material in your model and scroll down to the Alamo portion of the plugin, you may notice that you use a base texture and a normal texture. If you're editing a unit that was already in the game, it probably already has a normal texture. However, if you're creating a new unit, you will need to create one. Normal textures or bump maps are these bluish looking images here. They are used to help provide depth for your object. For example, the tank on the right has a bump map, while the tank on the left does not. Bump maps are used to create the illusion of depth. Notice how the lighting makes it look like this is filled out and kind of chunky, while the APC without a bump map looks completely flat. Creating a bump map is actually quite easy. All you have to do is open up your texture with paint.net. Go to multi-threshold and set it to 255 for the opacity. Go back to Effects, go to Stylize, and then use the Normal Maps Plus plugin. And now you can adjust the X, Y, and Z accordingly. Once you're done with it, you can save the .dds file under the same name as the bump map. Similarly to the way colors work, the parts of the bump map that are invisible will not appear on the model, but the parts that are visible will. This means that you can create a bump map like this where only parts of the model have the bump map effect. Additionally, what if you ran into a situation where you forgot to paint something or something doesn't quite look right with the model? Take for example back here where I forgot to paint the line on the APC. Instead of being forced to start over and paint the entire thing again, you can instead load the texture that you saved previously and edit it from there. That wraps up today's tutorial. I hope you found it useful. Goodbye!